Hello, students, and welcome to week 5. We're going to be covering trauma on a uh, more brief period of time because I don't think I can top Bessel van der Kolk from last week's video. But we will touch on a few things here, practical application for you in the ministry. And then we'll be going into death and bereavement. So here we go. Okay, so we mentioned a little bit about this last week, that the difference between crisis and trauma. And chapter 10 starts with when time doesn't heal all wounds. This is where we learn from van der Kolk that trauma can become locked in the amygdala. So we know that crisis can be seen as a turning point, while trauma is the response to any event that shatters your safe world. Very key here, safety, so that it's no longer a place of refuge. And as I mentioned before, crisis or trauma is actually an event that changes your entire worldview. So you no longer see the world as a safe place. If this kind of thing can happen, the world is completely different than I thought it was. So this is huge. Daniel Goleman, who's known for writing about emotional intelligence, calls trauma a hijacking of the brain. And in his books, he discusses how emotional intelligence is managing these things, getting the proper treatment so that we are not responding out of our trauma triggers. Now, Wright cites a 1994 study estimating 75% of the general population has experienced a traumatic event. 25% of those take on PTSD symptomology, if not full-blown PTSD. I would put to you that 1994 was a different time, excuse me, and more we are seeing acceptance and a lessening of stigma for the need for mental health care. We've got so far to go. However, this I think these numbers would be quite a bit different. So I think that the percentage is likely to be a lot higher because of reporting, and I think because of changes in relational stability and the structure of the family, and the change in the dynamics of the family system in our culture. So there's less resiliency. This is, in my opinion, it's arguable. Uh, so we see less capability to deal with trauma because we don't have secure attachment. And that's kind of my wheelhouse, is attachment and relationships as a marriage and family therapist. Okay, so I'm not going to dig deeply into trauma and the brain. Just note a couple of things because van der Kolk did get into this. He talked quite a bit about uh, the thalamus, the prefrontal cortex, and actually different levels of prefrontal. One thing I'd like you to note is the hippocampus, which is considered um, the switching station of the brain. It interprets emotional weight of the data that comes in, what our senses bring into our brain. And so it works to calm the emotional parts of the brain. With ongoing trauma, particularly in the developing brain of a child, it's the hippocampus actually shrinks. And this is one of the major uh, facts that Vanderkolk brings when he is protesting the symptom based treatment uh, approach, as opposed to looking at causality, which is the at the core of the mental health care system. We have this diagnostic statistical manual of mental health issues or mental illness, and that's the book that gives you the codes that you submit to insurance, and then you get paid. And that is built on symptomology. Yes, there are named illnesses, but it does not factor behaviors, particularly in children, that uh, attribute behaviors to trauma. So this is where we get the ADHD and the oppositional defiant disorder, and these other syndromes that are attributed to children that are misbehaving when in fact they're behaving very sensibly considering what they have experienced. Um, so this is something that's significant. So whenever you this see a particular stereotype um, of a criminal population, of a part of the country or a part of town or whatever, if you see an ongoing violent history in a family system, what we're talking about is perpetuation of ongoing stress, which affects the brain development, which affects behavior, which in turn gets passed down relationally in a family system or a community or um, basically any kind of relational system. Okay, so continue on. In trauma, the patient, in this case, your parishioner or your church member, needs to make peace with the memory of what happened. So Wright talks a little more in depth on page 197 of that. This is why I say talk therapy alone is not sufficient to process trauma. And since I taught this course before, I've since been trained in EMDR, which Vanderkolk talks about. And a few of you mentioned this in your papers. Uh, I'll be happy to talk to any of you guys if you want to know more about EMDR. And again, I reiterate, uh, students and staff of Campbellsville University receive free treatment through the CU Well Counseling Ministry. And we have myself, and there are a couple of students who've already done the training, and we have a huge cohort going through training right now. This is the 2021. 17 students, to my knowledge, are currently going through the process of training for EMDR. So not only do you have the resource of talk therapy, relational therapy, but trauma therapy, and an integration of those. I've never been more excited about what we have to offer. Okay, the amygdala, which is considered the more primitive or the less sophisticated part of the brain, interpreting sensory input for safety and danger. It has the ability to override or hijack, as Daniel Goleman says, the brain to ensure survival. Trauma freezes thinking. That's when your prefrontal shuts down, the executive function of the brain. Trauma alters the brain. We've already talked about this. Trauma takes its toll. So when Vanderkolk talked about being dumbfounded or speechless, this is where you can't talk. Language is offline. There's an isolation that comes in the event that severs connection to others, and there's a hopelessness. So trauma affects who we are. It affects the identity and its ability to fully live into what God created your identity to be. Um, this is a slide I use when I'm doing my couples workshops. So this is a great representation of what happens to the brain when experiencing trauma. So note here you've got the cue, that is the event. And of course, with couples, we talk about what is it that triggers you uh, to get into the fight that you always get into, the cycle that you repeat over and over. When we're talking about trauma, it's it's just as triggering in a relationship when a relationship is threatened as a traumatic event. So the way that the brain works is it takes in the information. There's a rapid appraisal, fight, flight, freeze. This is bad, right? And we have to react with our body first. So in a fraction of a second, we've seen it. Uh, the brain has said go, and the body responds. There's no meaning at that point other than, um, I see the pit bull running down the street at me. Um, I've got to do something to survive. If I stop and I analyze and I think about, well, what's going on here? This is really unusual, right? We've talked about this before. So body just runs or prepares to fight, or maybe if I freeze, you know, they won't see me. And sometimes, uh, like Vander Kolk, I believe, was talking about the um, karate instructor who froze because the training didn't was not stored in the amygdala, and so the response was out of that survival mechanism. And so this is where that happens. Now, eventually, the brain catches up when we have moved away from the danger or we fought off the danger. And then meaning begins to be associated as the higher brain functions come back online. And that is where we act. So, in a split second, all of this happens. If we're talking about a couple, we're talking about he raised his eyebrow that way, or she said she used that tone with me. And it's boom. Why are you always criticizing me? Why do you think I'm stupid? Or the car is coming at me. I react to get out of the way. And then later is when I realize that guy was had already crossed into oncoming traffic. Later when when your higher functions come back online, you're able to attach meaning to the situation. But this stuff right here all goes less than a split second. I did want to kind of show you this. If you're not familiar with Psych Central, this is just a great site for lay people, but it's also a great quick reference for we professionals. Um, I like my bullet points. I like my short readings. Um, I'm going to recommend that you take a look at this. Symptoms of PTSD. So the 25% that was quoted before, I don't know if that ratio holds true. I'm just saying that there are more people. If it's 25% succumb to PTSD or PTSD symptomology, this is what you're going to want to be watching for. So just kind of scrolling through here, you've got the event. And note here, oh gosh, I bet you can't see that. Let me try that again. Glad I remembered that. By the time I'm done with this class, I'll know what I'm doing. Okay, so note here, what we've got is that the exposure can be direct. You could be an eyewitness to it. It could be someone describing an event to you, or repeated or extreme exposure to events. Uh, when this is usually by professionals, we're talking about first responders, that sort of thing. Moving on, intrusion or re-experiencing. So here are some of the other symptoms. Intrusive thoughts or memories. This is where it's a nagging thought that just won't go away. You wake up in the middle of the night and it's kind of like you tell somebody, think about an elephant. Try not to think about an elephant, and what happens? You think about an elephant. Um, it's kind of and you've got to really work hard to think about something else, and this is actually brain based. So that intrusive thought or that memory that keeps coming back is going to stay there until something is done uh, to counter that. um, it it can be managed on the person's part, but when we're talking about it continuing on past what we would consider the crisis phase, then we're talking about further treatment, and I recommend brain-based treatment. Nightmares, flashbacks. A flashback, this is where some confusion comes in. Intrusive thoughts and memories are not flashbacks. That's just that nagging thing that just keeps hitting you. Um, a flashback is actually is if you were in that moment. You're seeing, you're feeling, you're experiencing, and like if you should decide to read The Body Keeps the Score, Vanner Kolk will actually talk about brain scans of people who've been in accidents and how the brain responds. And different people respond differently. Some will respond with, you know, increase in pulse rate, quickened breathing, sweating, and others shut down. It could, he actually mentions a study of a couple who were in the same automobile accident, and the husband had the fear, the breathing, the panic, and the wife just shut down, just went inside herself. Um, but yet both have um, that terror. One of them was ready to flee, the other froze. Uh, Psychological and physical reactivity to reminders of the event, such as the anniversary. And we'll talk a little more about that with when we get into death, but same with trauma. Avoidance symptoms, avoiding thoughts or feelings connected to the event, avoiding people or situations connected to the event. And that can really hurt other people too. I had a client who was good friends with her best friend, actually, who was murdered, and the family cut her off because they were together so much. They associated this dear friend of this girl um, with the loss, and it was doubly tragic for her. We'll talk more about that when we get into the discussion around death. Negative alterations in mood or thoughts. You switch your associations. You have memory loss around the event. Disordered sense of blame for yourself or others. Um, Take your time and go through this. But these are the kind of things you want to look for when you're dealing with, when you're trying to help someone, is to not get your feelings hurt if they lash out at you, to not take it personally if they don't remember that you were on the scene when it happened, to to just be prepared and to normalize it for them. If they say, "Oh my gosh, I don't even remember that you were there. I'm so sorry." No, no, no. This is exactly what the brain does in this kind of situation. Increased arousal, so you're continually watching for danger, difficulty concentrating. Again, this is one of those reduced capacities that we have talked about in difficult situations, in crisis and trauma. Dissociation, we're not going to get into a lot of that. We're getting into some of uh, the deeper symptomology here, but that's what we're talking about. Uh, Take a look at this Psych Central, and you can find definitions, really great 3-minute readings on what is schizophrenia, what is depression. Here, here's a 3-minute quiz to see if you may have ADHD. It's just really terrific. Now, it's certainly not any kind of a substitute for a diagnostic test or assessment, but if you've got some questions, this can be helpful. They've also got blogs from a lot of people in the field um, on different topics like personality disorders. And let me trust me, you're going to have people in your churches with personality disorders. um, God doesn't exclude us from those things, and even if we're people of faith. But uh, yeah, so just a really helpful tool. When you do look at some of the blogs, though, take them with a grain of salt, because there was one blogger in particular on narcissistic parents that still got a lot of work to do on her part. But it's interesting reading, because you read some of these things and you say, "Oh my gosh, that's exactly what my sister-in-law's family's like," or "Oh my gosh, this is my family." So it's certainly helpful to keep you informed. Okay, back to the slides. Aren't you guys proud of me? Okay, so just kind of peruse that and keep that in mind. It's a great tool in it. You don't have to spend hours and hours. You can get really good research based information in a really convenient form without having to be a psychotherapist. So, okay, moving on. What I'm going to have you do is to look at the commonalities through these different approaches. First and foremost, safety, making the environment safe and helping them feel safe. Um, this is going to be the foundation for every approach. Is calming down, calming. Don't say calm down, by the way, but presenting a calm presence. Um, Match their tone up to a point. If there's if there's escalation, see if you can kind of lower your voice and slow down. But certainly don't be condescending. If they're going, "Oh my gosh, I don't know what I do." Okay, well, just listen to me for just a second. Come with me. Match them, and that way they sort of sync up to you. The mirroring neurons in the brain kind of sync up, and then when you've got that connection, you can kind of help them bring it down. um, Familiarize yourself with a particular type of trauma. If you're going to have some common ones that we'll be touching on, or you may already have experience in these. Make sure that you normalize their symptoms. um, Gosh, it's been 2 hours and my heart's just racing. Okay, all right, as long as you're not sick or having a cardiac incident, just let's do some slow breathing here. Let's just remember that you're safe now. I'm here with you. You may have other people around that are there for support. Um, Try to get them to talk about it if they can. Um, there's clinical proof that just telling your story has healing effects on the brain. So if they can talk through it, but allow for silence, allow for dismissal. I can't do that right now. Okay, so just know that whenever you're ready, if you want to, I'm going to be here. I'm listening to whatever you need me to hear. Decondition harmful affective responses. In other words, if they start to get violent, or if there's some kind of negative response that isn't going to be helpful, then you say, okay, I know you're so angry. Let's just go over here and throw some rocks against this brick wall, or let's just walk. Um, had an incident with a kid, a couple of kids on a mission trip one time, and the brother of this kid, he had Downs, and he saw some kids being mean to one another, and he put a rope around his neck. Um, he'd seen somebody do that on TV. Well, of course, the brother just was hysterical, and so I got the two of them talking. Um, Brother said, they were being mean, and I saw somebody do this, and it made them stop. And so then I said, okay, let's, look at your brother though. See how he's really scared, because that was really dangerous. You can't do that. And when he looked at his brother's face, he saw how scared his brother was. And this was a big, strong kid, tears going down. And they just locked arms and just hugged. And then, we got little brother to go back and go back to his room, and I had one of the guys on the team take this kid for a nice long walk, even though it was after curfew. So some way to get some of those stress hormones to subside with physical activity if possible. Um, Deal with intrusive memories and flashbacks, but don't try to be the therapist. Acknowledge that these memories, if they continue, you can't suffer like this. You deserve better. Let's find some resources for you. Flashbacks almost always are going to require professional help, but do what you can to help in the moment. You may have somebody in a flashback, and they can be a danger to their family. So take appropriate action. Don't believe you can reason them out of this. Okay, let's figure this thing out. No, what we've talked about is an instant wiring of the brain. It is not, this part of the brain is not going to have access to what's going on down here in the amygdala, and it can be an instant wiring for that. So talking about it can, as trauma treatment can be helpful. Writing about it, practicing self-soothing techniques, a lot of that sort of thing, but that's not your wheelhouse. That's not what you bring to the party. So be sure to know resources ahead of time, so that you can reach out and get them to those resources. And that's one of the things I do and I know Dr. Hollis, and Dr. Griffith teach pastoral care and counseling, and we have our students put together a directory of mental health, addictions, and other resources, so that you have that right at your fingertips, right there ready for you. And you don't have to think about it. Oh my gosh, I need to get them to somebody who does, biofeedback or EMDR. Okay, here we go. This guy's listed as doing this, or groups or whatever. So trying to explain things when someone is in that state, is can actually be damaging, you know. Well, if you just think about it, it's really okay because no. Um, so so if you've got these trauma treatment resources, that's going to give them hope to say, okay, you know what, this is beyond what I can help with, but I've done some study of this, and I know some great ways that we can get you plugged in with somebody to help, and be available for them to talk about it as they go through that process. Um, Help them identify and list triggers. When somebody has been assaulted, the environment that they're in, the smells, the sounds. I think it was in the text that an association with the sound of air conditioning. That might have been Vanderkolk. An association with sound of air conditioning and that white noise was a trigger for this person who's sexually assaulted. So help them to know, hey, if you're going to have to go in your workplace and they have this ambient noise that triggers you, you may want to talk about sitting somewhere else for a while until this is well in hand. Be good to yourself. Now, a desensitization, if appropriate, here's what I'm talking about. This is not re-experiencing it, but there are some things that a person has to get right back on the horse with. A car accident. Just say, okay, let's just go and sit in the car together. We don't have to go anywhere. We don't have to do anything. You can turn the lights on. You can turn the windshield wipers on. Just try that. When you've got someone who's been robbed at their workplace, um, they've got to go back. There's no I can't go there. So helping them and having being supportive and coming alongside. If you've got someone who's had an incident in the workplace, take a step in and talk to the manager and say, hey, is this at least for a while, can this person not be the only person in the store, or is there somebody who they work well with, it's kind of a comfort to them, can they kind of pair up? Look for some solutions to help uh, them to return to the place of the trauma, but have some resources available for them. Now, as I said before, defensiveness is normal. Don't take it personally, and help them to not later on feel ashamed. Okay. The first bullet point here, slow is fast. When dealing with trauma, slow is the fast way to healing. Because if you go back to that chart about the cue and the assessment and the physical response in a split second, we don't want that to happen. What we want them to do is to relate from a calm place where all of the brain is at their disposal for use. So doing that slowly, not expecting or pushing for fast change, because if you lean in too much, then they're triggered, then you're back to fight flight mode, and that takes quite a bit of time. If going directly into a self-soothing activity, and I think I may have mentioned this before, when we've got somebody who's triggered, and the pulse rate gets up to that level, and they've switched into fight flight mode, then you are in a place where you've got to help them bring it down. They go directly into something that's a soothing activity, something that helps them to restore calm. And here's an interesting fact that it's a 20-minute it's a 20-minute process for a female to get the stress hormones to level out. For men, it's 40. I think we talked about this under the differences with men and women and crisis. So keep that in mind for this as well. and it's actually probably extended when you're dealing with some sort of trauma because of the magnitude of the event. Uh, so Matsakis has three stages here. You've got the cognitive stage, where there's the review of the memory, and the emergence of a linear narrative. In other words, in trauma, just bits and pieces come through, and you know that you're on the right track when they're able to start putting the pieces in order. That means that this part of the brain is coming online. Um, Emotional states, they give themselves permission to feel their feelings. So of course of course you were going to be afraid in that situation. Some people feel that they shouldn't have emotions, so allow them to know that this is actually going to help you get through this faster if you allow yourself to feel your feelings. um, you're not alone. It's not going to overcome you, and I will be with you. And then the mastery stage, when they're able to recount the event without going into a triggered response or a flashback. And this is where they're kind of able to write the end of the story. Um, Again, Judith Herman, real short description here: establish a safe environment. Job number one for each of these approaches. Remembrance and mourning, because trauma equals some sort of loss. It's a realignment of the planets for you. You've lost your sense of safety. You may have lost a person you care for. You may have lost your body safety, and then reconnection with life and people. Now, CISD is a short-term group approach. It's been used in events like 9/11, natural disasters, huge car pileups, those kinds of things. And it's right on scene, and immediately after the event. There's kind of a window of time where you actually have to engage in this process. Um, I'm not going to go too far into it, but this is a great structure to keep in mind, even if you're not doing a group that's got a shared event. Um, so just kind of bear in mind these steps. I said I was going to talk less about trauma, but that's kind of, I'm extending my time here. Diffusing is another approach. And then what I want you to do is go through the recovery guidelines, 231, 232. Now, don't do this instead of meeting with someone who's had a trauma, but use these tools, um, use this to enhance what you're doing. I know COVID may require some of this, but try to connect on some level. Okay, so how do we know recovery is happening? Well, we're less triggered. The fears start to diminish. The emotional response of anger or flight subsides. Rigidity decreases. No, I'm never going to get back in a car again. No, I'm never, right? That starts to decrease. Appreciation emerges. Um, if 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 this hadn't happened, I might not be able to have as much compassion for a person who's been through this. And they realize, hey, I was able to drive on the freeway yesterday. Incredible. So you have to make a mountain out of a molehill, so to speak. A small infinitesimal step is huge, especially when you consider trauma and its effect on the brain. If this is a huge step, if they're making progress in these areas, so be sure to do that. To be sure to notice, to really celebrate, and always go back to, gosh, do you remember 2 weeks ago when this happened? Did you think that in 2 weeks you'd be here, that you'd be able to do this? So that always is a great reminder, and it kind of helps a person to realize, hey, okay, yes, I have come a long way. Okay, so the crisis of death. I'm going to share this short video from Norman Wright himself. So bear with me for just a second while I bring this up.
One of the major difficulties that I've seen over the years with people in grief is that we live in a culture that does not talk about loss or grief. People are unaware of it. And then all of a sudden they're plunged into it. And at the time where they are at the most vulnerable point of their life, the most vulnerable place, intense pain, they also have to learn about the reality of what grief is. And many people think basically, I'm going crazy. What is this happening to me? I'm going over the edge. They're going to lock me up. But if we know ahead of time, this is grief, this is what to expect, then we can realize I'm not going crazy. I just have to go through this experience. There's a fog inside of our brain, as it were. And you'll be talking to somebody, and all of a sudden, in the middle of your discussion, it's like, what was I talking about? You're not as sharp. This is why we tell people be careful when you're driving, because this is a time of your life when you're most likely to get a ticket or have an accident. And I'll say, have you ever been driving and you don't remember the last 10 blocks? And they say, oh my goodness, yes. It's like, I woke up down here and I wonder what happened in the last 10 blocks. And that's happened to me as well. And so we're not as sharp. As I work with high school kids who have been through tragedies, I have to talk to the teachers about lower your expectations when it comes to the grading. They're not going to be remembering. I remember one young man that talked to me after a shooting in the high school. He said, I knew all this material before the shooting. Now I go back and it's like, I've never seen it before. What happened to my brain? It's like it just wiped it out. And this is what grief does to us. I think for me, grief work is the process of looking at my people say, or they lost their life. That is the primary loss. But you have a loss of secondary losses. You remember somebody was in the trash, somebody was in their friends, those are all years. If we identify those things, then we're not going to be ambushed as much. We'll realize, okay, this is a very loss that I'm going to need. Grief share is a support group that helps you heal from the pain. The grief share exercise.
Okay, spoke too soon. I didn't have that set up correctly. But hopefully you'll click on the link in the PowerPoint and take a look at that. I hope you heard the video, but if not, my apologies. I will send you the link as well. I'll give you an email. It's just a short introduction to a series that Wright and the Grief Share organization have put together. All right, so back to our material. My apologies. I'm supposed to go here. All right. So I talk a lot about attachment. Death is the ultimate severing of attachment. Um, I've had some of the best mentors who I've worked with in my spiritual growth and my growth as a therapist. Um, but one of my favorite teachers said that death is an invasion. It was not God's original intention to create mankind to die. So now, of course, the description, the official definition is the permanent, irreversible cessation of the vital functions of the body. Uh, it's the permanent severance of connection to someone else. Death is a part of life, but it is feared. Why is that? Well, you're going to have some time to reflect on that in on the survey in 241. Hopefully, you can put some of that into your reflection on the material as well. Again, sharing what you're comfortable with. So, kind of keep these in mind uh, as you share, or at least hopefully you'll benefit from going through this survey. Okay, types of death. This is pretty obvious, but each one comes with a different set of pain, a different impact. Um, Accidents, disaster, homicide, suicide, natural causes. So think about that. What are the differences that would come with each of these, and which one do you think might be more difficult than the others? Okay, now here's the again. You're gonna wear out your copy of Right if you continue in the ministry. You're gonna wear it out. You're gonna have your desk copy, and I always say when I have a book that I use a lot, there's gonna be coffee stains on it because I've got a drinking problem. I really have to have coffee every day. Um, so page 244, um, laminate that. Laminate that. That one is something, if you're not really great at committing things to memory, which I am not, um, you're going to want to have that on hand. Might even print it up to use as a notepad to have on hand, fill in as you go. Um, Looking at the loss, find out what are the roles that this deceased person assumed in the family. So not only the loss of the person themselves, but that's the secondary losses that Wright talks about. Um, who told them about the death? What are the circumstances around it? Look at the person who was lost and their position in the family system. What role did they take? What about the quality of their relationships? You think, oh, okay, well, if they weren't close, then it's not as big an impact. Well, that isn't necessarily the case. What we're talking about here, let's say um, you've got a parent who was neglectful of their child growing up, and the child learned to live on their own, um, and they distanced themselves. The loss of that parent is also the loss of anything ever improving or that parent ever becoming what I had hoped for or needed from them. And that's a different kind of grief right there. Um, Changes in family roles as the system adjusts, that's huge. Um, of course, observance of funeral rituals, um, and keeping in mind if they do or do not have faith. You're going to be dealing with family systems where you've got total unbelievers, hostile to the faith. You're going to have people across the board. And how do you balance that? How do you help with healing with that? Okay, so the church has been a a beautiful source of comfort and strength for families who've suffered a loss, a death. And they can also be the worst enemies, saying stupid things, having unrealistic expectations. Um, but Wright talks about prayer and support ministry going 2 to 3 months alongside this person, bringing, praying, offering support physically, spiritually, emotionally. Those churches who are fortunate enough to have it to offer counseling. And there are some programs that some churches that have counseling that a lay person could offer. Just kind of monitor that and make sure this isn't something more, that more help may be needed. So I bring up the question long term. For me, grief is not the 3 days off that you get when you've lost your spouse or your child, and then you have to go back to work. It's not the 2 to 3 months of prayer and support ministry. I'm saying think long term. Reach out on anniversaries of the death, wedding anniversaries, anniversaries of the marriage or the birth, holidays, other significant days, and do that throughout the span of grief. An uncomplicated death has a normal grieving time of 2 years. Hear me on this. That's uncomplicated. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. So have that on the calendar for yourself, for other people in the ministry with you. Now, 248 through 246 through 248, some of the symptoms. I suspect that as you read through this, you may have had folks say, I had a dream about them coming to me. I had a nightmare. You may not have thought of thinking you see that person in a crowd as a hallucination, but in a way it is. So kind of look through those and normalize those within yourself as well as with the bereaved. Okay, helping families reintegrate as a family system. We've lost a person who is unique and takes a particular role within a family system. Now what? And, sometimes there are fights over who takes the lead when a matriarch or a patriarch passes, and we've all got to get together at grandma's house. I don't care if dad can't cook. Right? It's got to be her house. We've got to help them to say, this is not something that your dad's going to want. Or, can you do this in such a way that he's not going to feel sad or ashamed? That's just a real simple example. If dad was the person everybody went to for advice and help, and now they're gone, what are our expectations of other people in the family? Can I get them thinking about that? And also thinking about these different periods of restructuring. There's bridging, not rewriting the past. And what I mean by that is when you've got somebody, there's going to be a certain level of idealization of the lost person, of the person who's passed. Some of that is normal and to be expected, but you're going to run into some difficulty if this was a terrible person. I mean, And there were a lot of people in the family that were hurt by this person, and then suddenly we've got people just saying, oh, they were so wonderful, they loved everybody, they were just great. um, you've got people on the perimeter who've been hurt by this person who are going to feel uh, unable to express themselves. They might feel um, shunned, rejected, that their feelings didn't matter. That so some of those things you want to have an understanding of, and help bridge to the past. Um, there were times I know that this person hurt you, and I'm so sorry for that. What is it like for you now that they're gone, and allow for whatever emotions come up. Now, clearly, if this is, you know, a spouse and the kids, maybe it's the stepmother, stepdad, whatever, and you know, that's not going to be helpful for it to become uh, a bashing, but to say, okay, this was difficult on everybody. This person meant something different to everybody in the family. You know, let's acknowledge that, and let's kind of honor what each person's experience was. Living in the present. Okay, so now that this person is absent, um, how do we how do we become a family again? What does that look like now? How does that person's role being removed affect us, and how do we respond to that? Is this something we can let go? Is this something that someone else can take on? Um, Finding a path to the future. So, the confusion, the unbelief, the surreal, that death is an invasion, and how do we move forward without this person? I've not imagined life without them. But to help them kind of build a new future. The goals, I just want to, on 253, I just want to caution you to follow these when the person is ready. So be a student of that person, and how they're reacting and responding. If they're in a place, like Wright said before, if they're in a place where this made no sense, they can't, they're still in that fog, just take it at their pace. And if they want to begin the process, um, just let them take the lead. Okay, this is probably an even more difficult in some ways. Is when someone's terminally ill. Uh, you, you know, uh, Everyone's heard of Kubler-Ross's stages of dying, and everybody thinks this is what the family goes through. But actually, these losses are within the person who is terminally ill. So attend to those things. Know that some of those things will occur in the people around them. But I'm going to tell you, hospice has exceptional resources. Um, and again, just help them to sort of prepare themselves for some of the feelings and the behaviors that are going to come with this process, which in a lot of cases is a natural process. Um, I will never forget the hospice worker who came the night my dad passed, and he passed in the home. Um, the family, the three kids were there. A couple of the spouses were there, and when when they came, when this chaplain came, we were all sitting around the table, and she just kind of read every person around the table. So we had one brother who talks incessantly. That's just how he rolls. The other brother talks, but he talks really slowly and pauses a lot. And then here's me. I'm just shut down. So she listens to the one brother, da, 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 da. She kind of leans in and takes in what the more laid back brother is doing. And then she grabs me by the hand and she says, "Come with me." Oh, we're getting rid of the medications, which back then, we didn't know you're not supposed to flush the medications. So she put me to a task, and it was exactly what I needed in that moment. They're incredible. They are incredible. And a hospice worker is going to be able to tell you many times within hours how much time your loved one has. It's just an incredible resource. Always look for them and see if you can engage them and refer them as a resource. And if not, some of their materials that you can download for free online, just so helpful. Coping with expected losses, abandonment. Talk to the person about, hey, I know they didn't want to leave you, but they had to. Don't be preachy though. No monologues. When you're with someone who's passing, the hearing is the last thing to go, according to hospice. So, have the family speak gently, play music that is meaningful, pray, worship, if that's what you've got with that family. Watch the patient's cues, be honest and be sensitive. And sometimes walking away literally or detaching subtly when it's time for you to back away. Okay, these are each of the different roles within a family system. So the death of a parent, all of this is dependent on where the child is in relation to the parent, age, stages of life. Always think about lifespan. And what you're going to find here is if it's a good parent, it's the loss of the nearest thing possible to unconditional love on the planet. Now, whenever you hear somebody say, "Oh, I need unconditional love," well, that's God's job. That's not a person's job. But this is a good parent is going to be the closest thing to it. It's the most complex to process when you're emotionally dependent on the quality of the relationship. The good relationship is complex, the bad relationship is complex, and each one has its own set of layers that need to be acknowledged, honored. It reorders the family system. We kind of talked about that earlier. Role confusion can ensue. And regardless of age, when both parents are gone, the child becomes an orphan. And that's exactly what happened around this table that I sat at when the hospice chaplain came. Here were some orphans. You ask yourself some really strange questions. Okay, now am I grown up? All of these thoughts come along with, what am I going to do without him? Death of a sibling. This again, it's about lifespan. If you've got an aging person, if you've got an adult, it's a signpost along the way of a life transition. It's going to bring mortality. Well, my brother was only a couple of years older than me. For a child, it's terrifying because now they've been introduced. It's one thing when they lose a classmate, that's going to hit home. But when it's your sibling, what that does is it robs the child of a built-in friend and foe. And it also robs them of their parents who are overcome with grief and have limited emotional availability to the remaining child as they go through this. So you can see how much more a child's going to need support, and that those parents are going to need support. Death of a friend. Um, Whenever you hear a four-letter word around this, shut that down. And the four-letter word is just. Oh, they were just a friend. They were just, right? Uh, don't let that be added into the conversation. Um, these are like these are like siblings. Friends have a right to grieve and receive support, and their level of grief should not be minimized uh, in comparison to the family. And one of my favorite preachers, Chip Ingram, has a sermon that he said, "Comparison always leads to carnality." And here's a perfect example of that is, well, at least they were just a friend. At least they weren't, right? Well, compared to, right, uh, that's not fair or accurate. Everyone's pain is their own, and it needs to be honored and observed, um, and taken seriously, not dismissed. Friends, though, can be a profound support to the family. Now, I mentioned earlier about the young lady who lost her best friend, and then the family cut her off. Oh, what a loss! She could have been such a comfort to them, and they could have shared their grief together. Um, that's one of the healthiest things to do, is to share together your heartache, to embrace one another, to talk about what's happened, and to talk about the good times and what you've lost. This one is can be controversial to some, and it's called an unrecognized loss. The death of a pet. Um, you might end up hearing dogs barking in the background here as I record this. Yes, I'm a dog person. Um, I was raised up though by farm parents. Animals are to be left outside. They're utilitarian. Yeah, you can enjoy a pet, but you can't be too excited about them. But that's not the case for everybody. These are members of your family. So however you feel about them, if you're allergic, if you're in love with your pet, I'm just saying that just like a friend, you can't use the, oh, well, it was just their dog. Oh, it was just the bird, just the cat, just the turtle. I gotta tell you, my heart nearly broke when my son's turtle died when he was a little guy. Um, it's it's something you've got to take seriously and to honor that. And you're going to get questions like, did my dog have a soul? Well, the Bible doesn't say. I don't know. Um, this is probably not a theological conversation you necessarily want to engage in. But if you've ever heard of Hank Hanegraaff, they used to call him the Bible answer man. He's actually got an answer on that one. I'll let you guys look that up. I will say that research has consistently shown that people with pets have lower stress and live longer. So when you're taking that into account, imagine the impact of that loss on someone. I had a client who, in the span of 6 months, um, was engaged to get married, lost, found out he was cheating, broke up with him, lost a grandparent, and then, right before Christmas, her dog passed. You think I'm not going to take that into account? It's just, and again, that's that looking at the big picture of uh, consecutive losses in quick succession. That's huge. So take that as just as big an event. Okay, I'm going to say no. It's not like the loss of your parent or another loved one, but it can feel that way, especially for someone who doesn't have a lot of close connections. Uh, Death of a spouse. This one, when if you've had my marriage and singlehood course, we talk about what it means when the two become one flesh. the brains actually begin to operate in sync. And there is, in fact, when I say they become one flesh, I don't just mean sexually, I mean cognitively, emotionally, the whole person. So, when Wright uses the analogy of an amputation, makes so much sense. You 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 hear about phantom pain when somebody's had an amputated limb. My dad's, who's diabetic, and he lost part of his leg after having an injury, and he sometimes would say, "My toes are really itching," and you'd say, you don't have any toes there. What's going on?" But the brain still has those wirings that that are looking for the end of that connection, this crossing the synapses, and then there's no signal beyond that, and that the brain actually uh, responds to that as though that person were still there, and that's the reason behind the hallucination we mentioned of you seeing that person's face somewhere in the crowd. You reach for your phone and get ready to call them. Um, and a spouse is the person that you will be the most intimate with if you do marriage right. You will have a part of your soul ripped away. So uh, bonding means that pieces of yourself um, are lost. Um, so kind of bear that in mind when you're thinking about loss of a spouse. And Wright talks about the loss of his spouse in the reading. Um, yeah, I really admire that perspective. Okay, death of a child. God did not set this up so that we outlive our children. But there is a bond that has been created that is so powerful that it overrides the survival instinct. And you'll argue, well, people will risk their lives to save another. And Jesus said, you know, who would who would choose to die for someone else? Well, if it was a friend, someone might actually choose to die. When it's a child, uh, it's the most likely to override the survival instinct in the person. So there's a deep loss that is not meant. It's not the way God created this order to go. So it violates the cycle of the family. Um, Wright goes into shadow grief, this dullness that robs you uh, of vibrance, color, beauty. Um, it's um, it's a type of trauma in itself, in that your world is never the same because that person, that child that you were supposed to see grow up and go through all of the phases of life before you left this earth, that you do not have, and that changes your worldview. Um, Characteristics and social factors, take time to review those, 289 through 290. Um, Now, this is kind of where my personal experience versus the research kind of sometimes are at odds. I haven't had a lot of clients who have lost children, but the ones I have, uh, there's a higher than a 12% divorce rate in my experience. Now, um, this is where we in ministry have got to swoop in and support that couple, because each one is grieving in a different way. And the isolation that comes with a death or a trauma, I would argue that this is more than just bereavement. It is trauma. That what happens there is uh, each one needs someone to hold them up, and the partner, the spouse, is not necessarily going to have that capacity. And then, of course, as you go back through, the blaming and some of the denial and some of these other factors that come around emotionally, that come around to death, are going to be projected onto one another. In some ways, that's the safe target because supposedly they're not going to leave. But you've got to keep in mind that is not something that a person can stand up under. And so, if the church is there, if you are there in ministry, you're going to do what you can to reinforce and shore up each of those people and guard them against projecting on one another. And then helping them pick up the pieces after in this new world that no longer has that child. Okay, so that covers the material for this week. Again, pay close attention to some of the page references, and I look forward to reading more of your fantastic writing. I'm just loving what you guys are sending me and how you're internalizing this stuff. My goodness, some of uh, the uh, the video reflections just really excite me because I know you guys are going out and you're going to have these resources. You're going to be aware of things that a lot of folks aren't aware of and be able to share those. And then coming at bereavement from an informed stance, from a place of taking yourself out of it and allowing the person uh, who is mourning to be able to let out what they need to and to feel safe. So if you need me, you do have my cell and email. And again, I look forward to reading more of what you've got. Take care.